Before TNA had its own World Championship, it had control over the NWA World Championship, and they would use that as their primary title belt, as TNA was the territory of the NWA. However, in 2007, when TNA and NWA split, and the agreement to use the NWA World Championship ended, TNA had no choice but to make their own World Championship, and that's exactly what they did. The NWA World Champ, Christian Cage, was set to defend his title against Sting and Kurt Angle at Sacrifice in a triple threat elimination match, but on the same day, he got stripped of the title. When it came to the triple threat match, Christian came out still holding the NWA belt, but he ended up getting rolled up by Sting, and at the same time, Angle had Sting tapping out to the ankle lock, and Angle announced that he was the new champion, becoming the first official TNA World Heavyweight Champ. On the episode of Impact after Sacrifice, Angle came down to the ring and introduced the new TNA World Championship belt. However, due to the controversial finish at Sacrifice, Sting and Christian came down to the ring, and they all argued over who was the real champion. So Cornette would make the title vacant, making Kurt's reign a short one at one day. Since the title was vacant, a tournament was held to crown the new champ officially, and the final would be a King of the Mountain match, pitting Kurt Angle against AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, Christian Cage, and Chris Harris, but it was Kurt Angle who managed to grab the win and the belt, making himself a two-time champion while being the only man to hold the belt so far. He defended in a triple threat match against Rhino and Christian on the episode of Impact after, and then when it came to Victory Road, we'd get a match of champions, and Kurt teamed up with Samoa Joe, putting his World Heavyweight Championship on the line against Team 3D, with Joe putting his X Division title on the line, and Team 3D putting their tag titles on the line as well. So basically, whoever got the pin wins the title of the person they pinned, and it was Joe who pinned Brother Ray to win the tag titles. Fortunately for Angle, he'd keep the world title. So on the next episode of Impact, Samoa Joe, who held the X Division title and both tag titles, challenged Angle to a winner-takes-all match at the Hard Justice pay-per-view. When it came to Hard Justice though, after Angle got some help from his wife Karen, he defended successfully and became the second TNA Triple Crown champ. However, it all started going downhill for Kurt when it came to No Surrender. He lost the X Division title to Jay Lethal, and then teamed up with Sting in a match against Team Pac-Man, and lost the tag titles. He managed to hold on to the world title for a bit longer, defending it the same night that he dropped the other titles against Abyss. But then at the next pay-per-view, Bound for Glory, Angle would drop the title to Sting after holding the belt for 119 days. However, after only holding for 2 days, Sting lost the title back to Angle on the next episode of Impact, making Angle a 3-time champ. He went into 2008 as champion and found himself putting his title on the line against Christian at Final Resolution, and Angle got the win thanks to some help from AJ Styles. And the same happened again at Against All Odds, but this time with some help from Tomko. Eventually, at Lockdown, Angle found himself locked inside a cage with Samoa Joe, and Joe got the job done, ending Angle's third reign at 180 days, and making Joe the third TNA Triple Crown champ. Joe would defend the title in a rematch against Angle on the next episode of Impact, and then on house shows up until Sacrifice, where Joe would put his title on the line against Kaz and Scott Steiner. Joe defended successfully, and then he retained in a King of the Mountain match at Slammiversary against Booker T, Christian, Rhino, and Robert Roode. Then at the next pay-per-view, Victory Road, he faced Booker T in a singles match, but the match ended in a no contest after Sting interfered, and Joe had to face Booker again at Hard Justice, this time locked in a steel cage with weapons. Joe defended successfully once again, and then moved on from Booker, finding himself up against Christian and Kurt Angle at No Surrender. Joe got the win again, and it looked as if no one was going to take the belt from him. However, at the next pay-per-view Bound for Glory, he'd go up against Sting, and Sting managed to get the win, ending Joe's reign at 182 days. And it's kind of crazy that this is Joe's only TNA World Heavyweight title reign. Anyway, this was Sting's second reign with the title, and he defended in a match against AJ Styles at Turning Point. Then he formed the main event Mafia along with former champ Kurt Angle, Booker T, Kevin Nash, and Scott Steiner. And the Mafia would have to face the Frontline, a team consisting of AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, and Team 3D, and Sting's TNA World Heavyweight Championship was on the line. The main event Mafia came out on top, and Sting kept his title, going into 2009 as champion. At the first pay-per-view of the year, Genesis, Sting put his title on the line against Rhino, and he retained. He then retained in a fatal 4-way against Kurt Angle and both members of Team 3D at Against All Odds, and then against Angle at Destination X. But eventually, he had to defend his title against Mick Foley at Lockdown in a 6 Sides of Steel match, and Foley ended Sting's second reign at 189 days. Foley kicked off his first TNA World title reign by having to defend at Sacrifice against Kurt Angle, Jeff Jarrett, and Sting, but the only way the title could change hands was if someone pinned the champ, and it was Sting who came out victorious, but pinned Angle, so he became the new godfather of the main event Mafia, but Foley retained the title. Then at Slammiversary, Foley had to put the title on the line in a King of the Mountain match against AJ Styles, Jeff Jarrett, Kurt Angle, and Samoa Joe. Unfortunately for Foley, he wasn't able to retain, as Angle got some help from Samoa Joe to grab the title and end Foley's reign at 63 days. On the episode of Impact after the pay-per-view, Angle defended successfully in a match where he teamed up with Samoa Joe against AJ Styles and Jeff Jarrett. Then at Victory Road, he retained against the former champ, Mick Foley, then against Matt Morgan and Sting at Hard Justice. But eventually, he had to put his title on the line in a 5-way matchup at No Surrender against AJ Styles, Hernandez, Matt Morgan, and Sting. And this time it was AJ Styles who got the victory, ending Angle's 4th reign at 91 days. AJ kicked off his first TNA World title reign by defending against Samoa Joe at house shows, against Sting at Bound for Glory, then Christopher Daniels and Samoa Joe in a triple threat match at Turning Point, and then Daniels alone at Final Resolution, going into 2010 as champion. On the first Impact episode of the year, he defended against 4-timer Kurt Angle, against Tomko after that, and then met Angle again at Genesis, where AJ retained once again, thanks to some help from Ric Flair. Against All Odds, AJ would put his title on the line against Samoa Joe again, and he got the win, then retaining on Impact in a fatal 4-way against Abyss, D'Angelo De Niro, and Desmond Wolfe. He was showing that he was a dominant champ, but at Destination X, he found himself up against Abyss one-on-one, and only just kept the title by no contest. AJ retained at the next pay-per-view, Lockdown against D'Angelo De Niro in a steel cage match. But the day after on Impact, he found himself in a match with RVD, with his title on the line. And even though AJ was looking unbeatable with the longest reign so far, RVD got the win, ending AJ's reign at 211 days. RVD retained in his first defense against Desmond Wolfe, but AJ attacked him after the match, and of course, after the run AJ had, he had to get a rematch. He got his shot at Sacrifice, but RVD retained. At the next month's pay-per-view, Slammiversary, RVD retained in a match against Sting, and then in a fatal 4-way against Abyss, Jeff Hardy, and Mr. Anderson at Victory Road. On the Impact after Victory Road, RVD had to defend his title in a Stairway to Janice match against Abyss. If you don't know what that is, it's basically a match where there's a 2x4 with nails in it, called Janice, hanging above the ring, and whoever grabs it gets to use it, obviously. Anyway, RVD managed to get the win, retaining his title, but he was attacked after the match by Abyss with Janice, leaving RVD seriously injured and having to vacate the title, ending his reign at 113 days. Since the title was now vacant, TNA held a tournament to crown the new champ, and the final would be a triple threat match, pitting Jeff Hardy against Mr. Anderson and former champ Kurt Angle at Bound for Glory, and it was Jeff Hardy who got the W, becoming the new TNA World Heavyweight Champion. He retained in a defense against Matt Morgan at Turning Point, and again at Final Resolution, going into 2011 as champion. He'd even go over to New Japan and defended at their Wrestle Kingdom event against Tetsuya Naito. However, when he got back to TNA and put his title on the line against Mr. Anderson at Genesis, Mr. Anderson came out on top and ended Jeff's reign at 91 days, despite Matt Hardy, Eric Bischoff and Ric Flair trying to get involved and help Jeff win. So Mr. Anderson kicked off his reign by defending on house shows against Jeff Jarrett and against Jeff Hardy on Impact. However, Mr. Anderson's reign was short-lived, as at Against All Odds, he faced Jeff Hardy again in a ladder match, and Jeff ended Mr. Anderson's reign at 35 days. So this was Jeff's second reign with the title, and he kicked it off with a successful defense over RVD on Impact. But unfortunately for Jeff, this reign was a short one as well, as he faced Sting on the next week's episode of Impact, and Sting ended his second reign at only 11 days. Sting would put his title on the line in a rematch against Hardy at Victory Road, defending successfully. Then he retained in a three-way steel cage match at Lockdown against two former champs in Mr. Anderson and RVD. Then against Matt Hardy on the episode of Impact after, in another triple threat match against Mr. Anderson and Bully Ray. But then, after one more successful defense against RVD at Sacrifice, Sting's third reign with the title was put to an end by Mr. Anderson, a Slammiversary after 108 days. Unfortunately, he didn't even get to defend his title. He went over to Mexican promotion AAA with Abyss to challenge for their tag titles, but they were unsuccessful, and when they got back to TNA, Mr. Anderson had to face Sting, and Sting defeated him, ending his reign once again, after 29 days as champion. Sting would then have to face Kurt Angle at Hardcore Justice for his first defense, and Angle defeated him, ending his fourth reign at 28 days, making Angle a TNA World Champ. He retained in matches against Mr. Anderson on house shows, and then lost to him by DQ on Impact, meaning that he'd keep the title. He retained in a match against Sting on Impact, and both Sting and Mr. Anderson in a triple threat match at No Surrender, then retaining against Bobby Roode at Bound for Glory. However, 2 days later on Impact, he was up against challenger James Storm, and Storm was the one to end Angle's fifth reign at 72 days. Unfortunately for Storm, only 8 days later, his reign with the title was ended by Bobby Roode, so we had another first-time champion, and this run was actually insane. He retained against Storm in a rematch on Impact, against AJ Styles at Turning Point, then wrestled to a time-limit draw in a 30-minute Iron Man match with AJ at Final Resolution, and he went into 2012 as champion. Then he'd retain against AJ in a rematch on Impact, James Storm, Bully Ray, and Jeff Hardy in a fatal four-way at Against All Odds. Against Jeff Hardy again the night later on Impact, Sting in a no-holds-barred at Victory Road, Storm again in a steel cage match at Lockdown, and RVD in a ladder match at Sacrifice. However, Bobby Roode's impressive reign was brought to an end after 256 days by Austin Aries at Destination X, after Aries handed in his X Division title for a world title match. Aries defended successfully in a rematch against Roode at Hardcore Justice, and then on house shows up until the next pay-per-view, Bound for Glory, where he was up against former champ Jeff Hardy after he won the 2012 Bound for Glory Series tournament, and Hardy got the win, ending Aries' reign at 98 days. So this was Jeff Hardy's third reign with the title, and he retained in a match against five-timer Kurt Angle on Impact, and then found himself up against Austin Aries again, but this time in a ladder match at Turning Point. But he got the win there too, and then retained against him again on Impact a few weeks later, going into 2013 as champ. He retained against both Aries and Roode in a triple threat elimination match. However, at the Lockdown pay-per-view in March, he had to face Bully Ray in a steel cage match, and Bully Ray, with the help of Aces and Eights, ended Jeff's third reign at 147 days. He'd mostly wrestle in tag team matches for the first month, not defending, but he did retain against Jeff Hardy in a TLC match, and against Sting in a no-holds-barred match at Slammiversary. But when he came up against Chris Sabin on the Destination X episode of Impact, Sabin pulled an Austin Aries, and he vacated his X Division title for a shot at the world title, and he was successful, ending Bully Ray's reign at 130 days to become the new TNA World Heavyweight Champion. However, he only defended a few times on house shows, and after only holding the title for 28 days, Bully Ray won the title back in a steel cage match on Impact, making Bully Ray a two-time champion. But he'd only defend on house shows as well, and when he met AJ Styles at Bound for Glory, AJ got the win, ending Bully Ray's second reign at 66 days. AJ kicked off his second reign by retaining in a rematch against Bully Ray on Impact, and then walked out of TNA with the title, refusing to sign his new contract offer. So TNA vacated the belt at this point, ending AJ's second reign at only 9 days. Since the title was vacated, we'd get another tournament to crown the champ, and it was Nick Aldis's Magnus who defeated Jeff Hardy to pick up the TNA World Heavyweight Championship for the first time. However, AJ Styles returned, and he claimed that he was the real champion since no one beat him for the belt. But since Magnus aligned with Dixie Carter, making sure AJ lost the match, it resulted in Magnus becoming the undisputed champion. AJ left after this, and Magnus retained his title in a match against Samoa Joe, a one night only, and then went into 2014 as champion, ending Sting's TNA career as well. He'd also retain in matches against Gunner on Impact, Samoa Joe at Lockdown, and Abyss, Eric Young, and Joe in a fatal 4-way. Eventually, Magnus met Eric Young in a singles match on Impact, and Young ended the 128-day reign of Magnus, giving us another new champion. His first title defense was a tough one, a Monsters Ball versus Abyss, and Young managed to retain. Then he defended successfully against Magnus at Sacrifice, former champ Bobby Roode and MVP on Impact, and even in a triple threat steel cage match against Bobby Lashley and Austin Aries. However, he'd have to face Lashley one-on-one on Impact, and Lashley ended his reign at 70 days. Lashley kicked off his reign with a successful defense against Young in a rematch against Jeff Hardy and Austin Aries on Impact, and at No Surrender, he retained against the man with the longest reign, Bobby Roode. Unfortunately for Lashley, he'd have to face him again with Kurt Angle as a special guest ref, and this time, Roode got the win, ending Lashley's reign at 91 days, and kicking off Roode's second reign. He went into 2015 as champion. However, on the first Impact episode of January, he was up against Lashley again, and this time, Lashley managed to end Roode's second reign at 111 days and became a two-time champ himself. He retained in a fatal 4-way against Austin Aries, MVP, and Roode, and then against MVP one-on-one in a no DQ match. But when he came up against 5-time champ Kurt Angle on Impact, Lashley's second reign was ended at 24 days, and Angle became a 6-time champion. Angle kicked off his 6th title reign by successfully defending in a triple threat match against Lashley and Eric Young, then against both of them one-on-one, and one more time against Eric Young in an I Quit match. Then, Rockstar Spud, the X Division champ, vacated his title for a shot at Angle and the world title, but he was unsuccessful, and Angle retained again. The same night, he'd retain again against former champ Austin Aries. However, his next title defense would be against EC3, and EC3 won, ending Angle's 6th reign at 145 days, and we had a brand new champion again. EC3 defended for the first time the day later against Drew McIntyre, or Drew Galloway at the time, then retained against Matt Hardy at No Surrender, PJ Black at Turning Point, former rival Rockstar Spud, and Matt Hardy a few times again, leading up to Bound for Glory. However, when we actually got to Bound for Glory, EC3 had to face both Matt Hardy and Drew Galloway in a triple threat match with Jeff Hardy as the special guest ref, and it was Matt Hardy who managed to end EC3's reign at 101 days by pinning Drew. So Matt Hardy was technically the champion, but EC3 filed an injunction that stopped Matt Hardy from appearing on Impact, forcing him to vacate the title. And as the title was vacant once again, going into 2016, you already know what had to happen. A tournament to crown the new champ. So they held the TNA World Title Series, and EC3 entered trying to regain the title. He went through former champions, getting the win against Bobby Lashley in the semi-final, then against Matt Hardy in the final, and EC3 won the vacant title back. However, 3 days later, he was up against Matt Hardy again, but this time in a last man standing match, and Matt Hardy was the last man standing, ending EC3's second reign at only 3 days. Matt defended successfully the night after against his brother Jeff in a no contest, and then Kurt Angle on the same night. He then retained against EC3 in a cage match at Lockdown, and against EC3 and Jeff Hardy in a triple threat, which also ended in a no contest. He'd faced Drew Galloway one-on-one on Impact, after Drew cashed in his Feast or Fire briefcase for a shot at Hardy's title, and Drew managed to end Matt Hardy's second reign of 67 days. He retained against both Hardys in the first two defenses, against Tyrus at Sacrifice, Eli Drake on Impact, Matt Hardy again, and another former champion Bobby Lashley. But eventually, he had to face Lashley again at Slammiversary in a match where KO or submission are the only ways to win, and Lashley came out on top, KOing Drew, ending his reign at 89 days, and kicking off his third reign with the title. Lashley defended successfully in a match against Drew on the episode of Impact after, then against EC3 and Drew in a triple threat match, and then he faced X Division champ Eddie Edwards at Destination X, wrestling to a no contest but keeping the belt. However, the feud with Edwards continued, and Lashley defeated him in a cage match on Impact to retain the World Heavyweight title and also grabbing the X Division title. Then he'd go on to pick up another title when he beat James Storm for his King of the Mountain Championship. However, he'd retire the King of the Mountain title, vacated the X Division title the day later, and after defending the world title one more time against EC3 at Bound for Glory, he dropped the belt to Eddie Edwards on Impact the day after, ending his third reign at 113 days. Eddie defended successfully for the first time against Cody Rhodes, then against Lashley, Eli Drake, and EC3. He went into 2017 as champ, and defended against both EC3 and Lashley in a triple threat match. Then EC3 one-on-one again at One Night Only. However, he'd face Lashley one-on-one again at Genesis in an Iron Man match, and this time, Lashley came out on top, ending Eddie's reign at 97 days. Lashley kicked off his fourth reign by retaining in a match against Jeff Hardy as Brother Nero, Eddie Edwards, and Josh Barnett. Then Lashley would find himself up against Alberto Del Rio, or Alberto El Patron at the time, and Alberto actually got the win. But due to the controversial victory, Lashley never lost his title and continued his reign. He continued to defend successfully against former champ James Storm, Eddie Edwards, and Moose, but when he came up against GFW Global Champ Alberto again at Slammiversary, he'd put his title on the line in a title unification match, and Alberto got the win again, ending Lashley's reign officially at 175 days. So Alberto was the new champ, and the title was renamed the Unified GFW Impact World Championship. A mouthful, I know, but Alberto's reign didn't go the cleanest. He met Lashley again on Impact the night after Slammiversary, and ended up losing by PQ, but obviously keeping the belt. Then after losing a non-title match against Johnny Impact, Alberto had to vacate the renamed world title after being suspended, and his reign was ended at 43 days. The company held a 20-man gauntlet to decide who would be the new champion, and Eli Drake was the man to get the job done, winning the vacant title and becoming the new GFW Impact World Champ. He defended successfully for the first time against Matt Sydal, then Johnny Impact, and against Cody Hall at Japan's Noah promotion. The title was then renamed again, this time to the Impact Global Championship, as the company dropped the GFW name. At Bound for Glory, Eli retained against Johnny Impact again, against Petey Williams, and then at Genesis, he'd retain in a triple threat 6 Sides of Steel match against both Alberto and Johnny Impact. He went into 2018 as champ, but eventually he'd come up against former champion Austin Aries, and Aries got the win in 53 seconds, ending Eli Drake's reign at 146 days, and becoming a 2-time champion. The title was renamed again, this time to the Impact World Championship, and he retained it in a match against Eli the night after. Then he retained in a match against Johnny Impact, and even grabbed the Impact Grand Championship when he defeated Matt Sydal in a champion versus champion match. He picked up even more titles in other promotions and started calling himself the Belt Collector. However, after defending successfully at Zelo Pro Arrival, he'd put his Impact World title on the line in a triple threat match at Redemption against Phoenix and Pentagon Jr., and it was Pentagon who got the win, ending Aries' second reign at 102 days. Unfortunately for Lucha Underground's Pentagon, he had to face Aries in a rematch on the Impact Under Pressure show, and after only holding the belt for 2 days, His reign was ended with Aries becoming a 3-time champion. Aries unified the Impact World Championship with the Impact Grand Championship, defended successfully against Rich Swann at One Night Only Zero Fear, and against Moose at Slammiversary. However, he'd faced Johnny Impact at Bound for Glory, and Johnny got the win, ending Aries' third reign at 173 days, and becoming the new Impact World Champ. He retained against Phoenix the day after winning the belt, then against Killer Kross on Impact Final Hour, against former champion Eli Drake, Moose, and against Brian Cage at Homecoming. He made it into 2019 as champion, and also beat Cage, Killer Kross, and Moose in a fatal 4-way to retain. However, when it came to the Rebellion pay-per-view, he put his title on the line against Brian Cage again, but this time with Lance Storm as the special guest ref. And this time, Cage ended Johnny Impact's reign at 196 days. He defended successfully for the first time at Tales from the Ring 3 against JT Dunn, and then against Sami Callihan in a no DQ match at Bound for Glory. He then faced Sami in a rematch on the Impact episode after, but this time it was in a steel cage, and this time, Sami got the win, ending Cage's reign at 180 days. He retained against Brian Cage in a rematch at Turning Point, Clayton Gaines at Revolver November to Member, Rich Swann at No Surrender, and Rhino in a street fight at Motown Showdown. He got to 2020 as champ, but he had to face Tessa Blanchard at Hard to Kill after she won a #1 contendership gauntlet. And Tessa actually ended up beating Sami, ending Sami's reign at 89 days, and Tessa became the first woman to win the title. She retained against Taya Valkyrie. Then, after being inactive for so long, her contract was terminated, and the title was once again vacant, with Tessa's reign ending at 165 days. So you know what this means? We need to crown a new champion once again, and this time it'd be a fatal 5-way elimination match, including Eddie Edwards, Ace Austin, Trey, Rich Swann, and Eric Young at Slammiversary. And it was Edwards who would win the title and became a 2-time champion. He defended successfully against Brian Myers, Sami Callihan, and Trey on episodes of Impact, and then retained against the veteran RVD at the Emergence pay-per-view. However, on the episode of Impact after, Edwards came up against Eric Young with his title on the line, and Eric Young managed to end Eddie's reign at 28 days and became a 2-time champ himself. He went over to Lariato Pro and won the Lariato Pro title in a triple threat steel cage match. And then he defended his Impact World Championship in a rematch against Edwards at Victory Road. However, he'd meet Rich Swann at Bound for Glory, and Swann would end Young's second reign at 70 days and became the new Impact World Champ. Swann made his first successful defense in a rematch with Young on Impact, then against former champ Sami Callihan at Turning Point, and then retained against Chris Bay at Final Resolution. He made it through to 2021 as champion, retaining against Tommy Dreamer at No Surrender, and then at Sacrifice, he'd face Moose, who brought back the old version of the TNA Heavyweight Championship and proclaimed himself champion, and to see who would face Kenny Omega, AEW's world champ, in a champion versus champion match. And it was Swann who got the win, unifying the title and getting a shot at the AEW world champ at Rebellion. Unfortunately for Swann, Kenny Omega ended his reign at 183 days, and Omega took home all the gold, defending his AEW world title and becoming the new Impact World Champ. He'd retained the title for the first time against Moose at Against All Odds, then against Sami Callihan at Slammiversary. However, he'd then put the title on the line over on AEW Rampage against Christian Cage, and Cage managed to get the win, ending Kenny's reign at 110 days. So Christian was back in TNA for the first time since 2012, and he defended the Impact World title for the first time against Brian Myers at Emergence, then Ace Austin at Victory Road. However, when it came to Bound for Glory, he'd faced Josh Alexander after he vacated the X Division title for a shot at Christian's title, and Josh Alexander ended Christian's reign at 71 days. Unfortunately, he wouldn't make it a day with the title, as Moose called for his shot at the title after winning the Call Your Shot gauntlet, and he defeated him, making Moose the actual champion this time. and he defended successfully for the first time against Eddie Edwards at Turning Point in a Full Metal Mayhem match. Then he went into 2022 as champ, retaining against Matt Cardona and W. Morrissey at Hard to Kill, Morrissey again at No Surrender, and against Heath at Sacrifice. However, he'd come up against Josh Alexander again at Rebellion, and this time, Alexander got the win, ending Moose's reign at 182 days, and becoming a two-time champion. He defended for the first time against Moose in a rematch, and went on a hell of a run, retaining against Tomohiro Ishii at Under Siege, against Gabriel Fuerza at Destiny the Clash, Eric Young at Slammiversary, Joe Doering at Against All Odds, and defended through to 2023, where he retained against Bully Ray at Hard to Kill, and Rich Swann and Kenta on episodes of Impact. However, it was announced that after holding the title for a record-breaking 335 days, Josh Alexander's second reign would end by having to vacate the title due to an injury. Steve Maclin and Kushida would be the ones to battle it out for the vacant title at Rebellion, and Maclin got the win, becoming the new Impact World Champion. He defended for the first time against Rhino on Impact, and then against PCO in a no DQ matchup at Under Siege. However, at Against All Odds, Maclin's reign was ended at 54 days by Alex Shelley. During Shelley's reign, the company went back to calling themselves TNA instead of Impact, and awarded Shelley the brand new TNA World Championship belt. He defended successfully for the first time against Brian Myers on Impact, then against Maclin on the Impact Down Under tour, and then retaining against Nick Aldis at Slammiversary. However, after the match, Josh Alexander returned, and of course, he claimed that he was the real champ since no one beat him, and eventually the two would face each other at Bound for Glory, but Shelley retained. He went into 2024 as champ, but Shelley would come up against Moose at Hard to Kill, and Moose ended Shelley's 218-day reign and became a two-time champion. Moose's second reign kicked off with a match against Shelley at No Surrender, under No Surrender rules, and he defended successfully. Then Moose retained against Eric Young at Sacrifice, DeMarcus Kane at WDWA Tough Luck, and Nick Nemeth at Rebellion. Then, after one more successful defense against Matt Hardy, he'd put his title on the line in a six-man elimination match against Nick Nemeth, Frankie Kazarian, Joe Hendry, Josh Alexander, and Steve Maclin, and it was Nick Nemeth who got the win, ending Moose's second reign at 189 days. So Nick Nemeth is our current champion right now at this point in time, and so far he's defended the belt against Mustafa Ali, Josh Alexander in a 60-minute Iron Man match at Emergence, Moose at Victory Road, Joe Hendry at Bound for Glory, Eddie Edwards at Turning Point, and it looks like he may be making it to 2025 as champ, but that still remains to be seen. So there you have it, the entire history of the TNA World Championship so far. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe, click here for another. And if you want to become one of the dogs yourself, check the links in the description.